Sorry, I'm just setting up the recording for you guys. Today I'm going to be presenting on SchoolEngage and how it is going to be interacting with PASI in various ways, specifically through moving data from SchoolEngage.
I got it. I'm good.
Oh, someone unmuted. I'll just go unmute them. Yeah, so it's going to be specifically about how SchoolEngage moves data between SchoolEngage and PowerSchool and into PASI, and where we're going in terms of document integration with SchoolEngage. So there are a few things I'm going to be covering in this presentation because we have a very wide spectrum of people here with what experience they have with SchoolEngage. So I'm going to be starting out with a very basic overview of how Writeback works in SchoolEngage right now. Then I'm going to be talking about very generally how PASI and PowerSchool and SchoolEngage are all related to each other in terms of data and kind of the fundamentals in that and how they relate to writing back from SchoolEngage to PowerSchool to PASI. Then I'm going to be talking more specifically about what people in sort of an admin assistant role will be doing and how it'll change from what they're doing now, because they'll have a few more steps during the write-back process, but it'll ultimately make the data better. And then I'll be talking about some of the upcoming document integration between SchoolEngage and PASI. And then at the end of the presentation, but also during a couple points throughout it, I'll be taking any questions and feedback in the chat window. And I'll try to get through as many of them as I can, but if there's quite a lot of questions, then we might have sort of a follow-up supplement where I address some of these in a supplementary video or an email. So the first section that I want to talk about is what is Writeback and how it works right now in SchoolEngage. So Writeback is kind of the term we use in SchoolEngage, and it's basically the action of taking a data set and writing it to another source of data. So in the context of SchoolEngage, the main time this is used is between SchoolEngage and PowerSchool. So in SchoolEngage, a lot of the processes work around getting a student or a guardian to submit a form. They'll complete the form, and when that form's completed, it goes back to an admin assistant to review. Once that admin assistant has reviewed it, they have the ability to move that finalized data from SchoolEngage into their PowerSchool record. Generally, this happens after the form has been completely reviewed, so the admin assistant would go through, make any corrections that they might need to make. And then in SchoolEngage, we also have functionality called office fields. These basically work the same way as an office-only field would work on a paper form. But basically in SchoolEngage, there can be a set of fields that only the office staff can see and would need to fill out. So this would include things like effective dates, document number. In PASI, there's that, or in the PASI page within PowerSchool, there's that extended enrollment that has like the grant codes, the enroll types, all of that kind of stuff. So those two sets of data, the data that the parent or student filled out and the office fields that the staff filled out, that's the collection of data that gets moved to PowerSchool. So that's Writeback at a very, basic level. So I'm going to walk you guys through, for anyone who might not be familiar with how it works in SchoolEngage right now, basically how the Writeback works. So if a student is not currently linked to PowerSchool, when you go to write them back, you'll be prompted with this page here. As you can see, there are two main options. So there's this Enroll New Student panel. This is for someone who has never been in your district. So if you choose this, it's going to go and create them as a brand new enrollment in your district. The second option here is a match. So what SchoolEngage does is that we send off the information from the form to see if that student has already been in your district. Maybe they were there a few years ago and they transferred out. Maybe they took summer school once, and so they technically have a file. Maybe they took, a kindergarten program and then came back for junior high. So what we do is we take the name, date of birth, phone number, address, that kind of information, and we see if we can get any matches in PowerSchool. So the second option that you have is that if you click on this panel before moving on to the next step, it will actually link the form you're writing back to the existing PowerSchool record. One thing to note is that if you are doing a match, PowerSchool does have restrictions on outside systems being able to change the enrollment information. So, for example, if they were at one school, they transferred out of the district, and then they moved back in a few years later, but they're going to a different school, you're actually going to have to go into PowerSchool and change that manually still. That's just a limitation that PowerSchool has. So if you choose enroll new student, this would be for a brand new student who has never been in your district. You'll get an additional page, and this additional page is going to have their basic enrollment information. So you can see there's the school and grade, the entry date and exit date for when they're coming in. This is on, that scheduling setup and transfer info, the term, and the status that they're going into the district with. So obviously, if they're registering for next year and rollover hasn't occurred, you might want to pre-register them and choose the 2021 term. In terms of what schools are available, what grades are available, and what terms are available, these are all pulled directly from your PowerSchool. It's based on what is set up there. So if you go to do a writeback and you find that a term is not available, maybe check in with your PowerSchool lead to see if those terms have been set up yet, because sometimes they haven't been. Although with I'm just seeing there's a question. Are you able to put some kind of obvious visual alert identifying when the student is current at a different school in PowerSchool? Yeah, I'm going to write that down as a good idea, because sometimes parents don't go in through the parent portal. Ultimately, that's what they should be doing. But sometimes they don't. They go and make a brand new account, and they can actually be current in the system. So that's actually a good piece of feedback, Brian. I'm going to take that down, and we're going to look into implementing that. So as I was saying, the terms and all that information are pulled from PowerSchool. The entry date by default is set to the first day of whatever term you choose, or if that term's already started, the current date. One really common request that we've been getting from users is that they really wish that some of these fields could be pulled more directly from the form, so that, if they indicate that they're starting late, it can just put that into this entry field. That is feedback we have gotten, and we will be doing that in a future update before the next school year starts. So before August is going to be when a lot of those admin assistants are going to be coming in for the year. So that's basically the process for what we have in SchoolEngage up until recently. If they were a brand new student, you would enroll them and fill out their enrollment information with the option of matching them. And if they were already in PowerSchool, it would actually just automatically do it. There wouldn't be any intermediate steps. Now, one question that we get a lot is how students are linked to PowerSchool, because I'm saying, well, it depends if they're linked to PowerSchool or not. There are 3 different ways that students can be linked between SchoolEngage and PowerSchool. The first way is that if they get added into PowerSchool, we actually sync down all of those parent and student users every night. So if you put a new student in PowerSchool, it'll automatically come into the system, and the next day they will be linked to PowerSchool. The second way that students can be linked to PowerSchool is actually during that writeback process that I just went through. So they're a brand new student to your district, and you fill out that enrollment information. When you hit submit on that process, it will link them to PowerSchool, and then the next time you go and do a form for this student, it already knows their PowerSchool record. And then the third way that a student can be linked to a record in PowerSchool is if they are matched in the process we just went through. It will link them to the existing record that they had. So that's what we had in SchoolEngage, and now this is where we're going to be going with functionality that's previously gone live with some districts and will shortly be going live with everyone. We've added, as you can see here, 2 additional steps. The first one is PASI actions. So I'll go through these in a lot more detail later in this presentation, but basically, when you're updating a record directly in the PowerSchool interface, it's asking you to choose that plus sign or the edit sign. It gives you additional feedback, and it makes you kind of do some extra work to make sure that the data that will move from PowerSchool to PASI is always correct. And what we have been striving to do is capture those workflows in SchoolEngage so that SchoolEngage replicates them as closely as possible. The second new page that we have is changes in PowerSchool. So one really common thing that we were hearing is that they would, different districts, for example, they'd push out their demographics form in September, and then some parents are really on the ball. They fill it out like right away, and some parents are not on the ball, and sometimes it takes them weeks or even months to get that information in. And what can happen, especially because at the start of the year, your superintendents and your higher ups, they really want counts. They really want information regarding, special needs information, grant codes, enrollment types. If they have to, they'll make those changes directly in PowerSchool if they don't get the demographics form back. And sometimes those demographics forms sit for a while. So we hear that, well, we got the parent to fill out the demographics form, and then we changed the information in PowerSchool. And then when we write back the form, it's wiping it out. So we actually have added another step to write back and actually to the review page. I don't know if anyone was in the SchoolEngage webinar yesterday, but I know that Jeremy walked through this step there. You're able to see if a field has changed in PowerSchool since a form was created so that you don't wipe anything out. But I'll go through that later in the presentation, as I mentioned. So a final note on writeback in SchoolEngage. Always make sure you verify your matches. Linking to the wrong student can definitely cause cleanup work because you have to go in and change all that information back, and we have to help you unlink them. Although PowerSchool 20.4, which is coming out right away, it might even come out as soon as today. It's got some new auditing features where you can check the previous value of some of the fields on the demographics page. So that'll be a little bit easier to manage in the future. And we're actually looking at integrating with that as well so that we can show you who's changing fields, when they were changed, and the history of that if you do need to revert something. In order to get the best writeback possible, there's a few things we would always recommend. I know that you guys have a lot of students and a lot of forms to get through, but always try and review those key areas on the form, like the documents, like the document numbers and their citizenship, like the contacts. Always make sure you're utilizing the Office tab. Those fields are really important because the parents are not filling those out. But generally speaking, across the board, PowerSchool and PASI does require them. Like if you write back a phone number without an effective date, well, PASI is not going to be very happy with that. You're going to get a core alert back. This is more aimed at some of the SchoolEngage leads in the district, but always make sure you're doing thorough tests of the forms before they go live. It's generally a good idea to do a test with the minimum data because parents are going to run through the forms as quickly as they can, some of them. So do a test where you fill out as few fields as possible. Do some tests where you fill out absolutely everything and make sure that there's nothing missing on your form because maybe that'll expose a key piece of data that's missing. And then try a bunch of the really weird, less common use cases that maybe only 1% of students would have. And this last one applies for everyone. If there's something on your form that maybe you don't think is clear enough or you don't think is working or you think is confusing parents, always give feedback to whoever is kind of that district lead for SchoolEngage, and then they can always communicate with us directly too if there's something that they maybe need assistance setting up, because ultimately at the end of the day, we want these parents to have the most streamlined forms possible just because the harder they are for the parents, the more support calls the schools are getting. And if we can save time and streamline things, that's ultimately our goal for everyone. So now it is time to move into where SchoolEngage is going with the PASI functionality. And I'm going to start out by going through some important context for how PowerSchool interacts with PASI so that you can contextualize that with how SchoolEngage is going to work. So primarily speaking, PowerSchool most directly, in terms of student data, interacts via the state reporting page. I think most people in this presentation are in Alberta, but in other regions, you'll have a variant of the state reporting page that'll look similar to what we have here. These changes are sent into a queue, and from this queue, PASI is going to look at them and decide if it thinks that they are valid or not. If there's something in the data that PASI doesn't like, it will reject it or send core alerts back to PowerSchool as feedback. And in addition to this, PowerSchool itself also has a lot of validation that is done directly in the interface before it goes to PASI. And as you can see down here at the bottom, this yellow is an example of this. So if you try and enter a mailing address and there is information missing, before PowerSchool even attempts to send that to PASI, it's going to make you fill that out because it just knows that it's going to be invalid data. In addition, each of these sections in PowerSchool on that state reporting page have three main actions. There is the add action, the edit action, and the delete action. I'll be going over each of these actions in more detail, but basically the big key difference here and the two that you're worried about are the add and edit, because add will add a brand new record, specifically for something like address. If you moved, you're saying that this is not the same house, this is a brand new house. And edit is for a correction, which basically saying, okay, well, there was a typo. Maybe the formatting they used wasn't that nice Canada Post address formatting that we're all striving for, and I need to correct it. So it's going to change the existing record in PowerSchool. So what we've tried to do in SchoolEngage is mimic this state reporting page as closely as possible. So there's those, I think, about 10 core sections on that Alberta state page, your other name, identification information, preferred address, preferred phone, etc. We've added each of those as a new page in the writeback process where you can deal with them one-on-one. One of the big reasons we did this as pages is that when you're in PowerSchool itself, you still have to hit that little plus or pencil icon for each section. You can't just change everything. And so we wanted to, again, mimic that workflow. On every single writeback, you're not going to see every single section necessarily, just because we're trying to save you guys as much work as possible. So if there's a section that has nothing mapped to it on the form, so you'd never change it, a very common example of this is going to be that deceased section and the international mailing address section. Then we're not going to make the admin go through that page every time because it's a step that they don't really need to do. Additionally, we scan all of the data coming in and compare it to what's in PowerSchool. And if an entire section, let's say the preferred phone section, if there's no fields that were changed, we're not going to be touching that section anyway, so we don't need the admin assistant to take that extra step. So these pages that you're going to see, such as the identification information one on the left, these are always going to be only things that admin assistants need to interact with. We've made sure to title them exactly the same as they are in PowerSchool, and each of them will contain the same fields as in PowerSchool. So it is a one-for-one direct relationship here. One thing to keep in mind is that you're only ever going to see these steps when you are writing back on a student who is already linked to PowerSchool. The reason for this is that on a brand new enrollment, there isn't really any choice for what actions you're doing. If it's the first record, it's always going to be added in most cases, and so you don't need the admins to do that. We've set it up so that for new enrollments, it handles all of that automatically for you and gets it correct every time. So now I'm going to start going through what information is in the view that you have here. So there's the four main columns, as you can see. The first column, this is the fields themselves. The name that they will display with here is going to be the same name that shows up on the form that parents are seeing or staff are seeing in the Office tab. And as you can see, if a field is in the Office tab, again, meaning that that is a field that staff have to fill out before the form is submitted, it will be marked with this little Office indicator so you know who was responsible for it. Was it the staff? Was it the parents? For some of our more technical users, if you hover over one of these names, it is actually going to tell you what the mapping is in the SchoolEngage form editor, as well as what the actual technical name of this field in PowerSchool is. So you can see here that it's on SABSTUX is the main Alberta state page table, and then it is the mailing effective date field. In this case, it's fairly straightforward named, but there are fields in PowerSchool where you can't necessarily tell what the field is just by the name of what's displayed. Moving on to the next page, or the next section, pardon me, is the original form value column. So this is going to show the data as it appeared on the form when the parents first received it. So when they first opened it, what is there? On a new registration form, there's going to be very minimal data here. It'll generally be blank because the parent is filling it out for the first time, other than maybe the parent's name and some very basic information pulled from their profile. But on a demographics update form or a re-enrollment form, this column will be absolutely key because it shows what came from PowerSchool when the form was first assigned. And that's going to be what the parents saw and what the parents are correcting. The third column is the current SIS value column. In this case, for most people here, I'm imagining that's going to be PowerSchool. This is what is in PowerSchool right now. This isn't something that we sync and store. This is actually pulled on demand. So the data that you'll see when you open this will be maybe 10 seconds old up to 30 seconds old. It depends on how fast the data querying is from your guys' PowerSchool. But it'll always be accurate, and this will be really useful for detecting changes, as I'll show you guys later in this presentation. And then this last column, the new form value column, this is the final value that appeared on the form. So after the parents filled out the form, after the staff completed their office fields and the form was approved, these were the final values that showed up after the review process. So generally speaking, that means that when you go and you push that data from SchoolEngage to PowerSchool and PASI, that is the data that you're moving. But there'll be more on specifically how that gets moved later in the presentation. So the next thing I want to go over is the coloring of the cells. As you might have noticed in the example, some of the cells are highlighted. So the three main colors are yellow, red, and green. The yellow highlights, these are for fields that are unique in terms of data. So as you can see up in this example, the original form, so when the form was generated, and the current PowerSchool value are both the same, but the new form value is different. So it's highlighting to basically catch your attention and say, okay, this field was changed at some point in this process. If all three are unique, it does sometimes happen where you pulled a field from PowerSchool and then it was changed in PowerSchool since then, but then the parent also changed it. All three will be yellow. The yellow can also appear in only the first column if the parent made a correction, but that correction was already manually done in PowerSchool as well. The second coloration that you see is red. And red appears when a piece of data was changed in PowerSchool externally to SchoolEngage. So you can see on this example, this mailing province, well, when I generated the form, it was British Columbia. And after the parent completed the form and the staff reviewed it, it still was British Columbia. But for whatever reason, in PowerSchool, it was changed to Alberta at some point. Basically, that red is just for you to really take a look and make a decision, because sometimes things get changed in PowerSchool and they didn't need to be, so you'd want to overwrite them again. But sometimes that information, maybe it came up during class, like a student had an allergy that wasn't previously known and the teacher went and manually entered it. That's something you would definitely not want to overwrite. And so it it will highlight here, and you can make a decision about that. But I'll be going into more details about how you can make decisions on data in this pop-up later in this presentation. And then there is green. So green is going to be what the data is in PowerSchool when you submit it. Where the green appears depends on the actions. I'll be showing you all the different scenarios later, but once you've chosen if you want to add or edit or do another action, it'll highlight your final decision in green, so it's always very clear what's moving to PowerSchool. So the next section I want to go over here, and this is before I actually go through the actions, but it'll give a good overview, is recommendations. So obviously there's a lot of data here. It's a very new system, and in some cases it might be overwhelming, especially at the start of the year when you're having tons of forms you want to go through. So we have added a number of recommendations in the system where we scan the data going into each section and we give the user some guidance as to what we think is going on. This is meant to streamline the writeback process to try and make it as easy for those admin assistants as possible. But I do want to emphasize very clearly that this is not a replacement for reviewing the data. We are doing our best to make these recommendations as good as possible, but we can't guarantee that they will always be correct. So still always review that data. In that page you can see, as you can see, the recommendation says that only one field in the section changed, so it's likely just a correction or formatting change. And in this case, the document number was off by 1. This most likely was a correction, so I would just want to edit this record. Now, there are 5 different actions in general that SchoolEngage will recommend. The first one is editing. This means that SchoolEngage believes that this is just a minor correction or clarification to data, but it's not actually a new record, and it will just update whatever the current record in PowerSchool and PASI is. The second recommendation is add. This is recommended when there's a very significant change or a key field is changed. And I'll kind of go into more detail on what key fields are later. But key fields are basically the main field of that section. So if there's only one field that's changed and it's the effective date, that's probably a correction in most cases. But if there's only one field changed and it happens to be the phone in the preferred phone section, well, if the change is more than 1 or 2 digits, that's probably actually a new phone and it should be added. So this is for major data changes. In this case, the existing record will take on it'll be expired as of the effective date of the new record, and that new record will be pushed in. The third recommendation that SchoolEngage will offer is the ignore recommendation. This is offered when we don't think that the data changes are significant or correct. Maybe the parent had their full name capitalized and for whatever reason they entered it again lowercase, but you don't actually want that in PowerSchool. It's just going to taint your data. So if you don't think that the changes in a particular section are actually worthwhile, they're just reducing the quality of the data or are basically trivial, you can choose to just ignore that change. The fourth recommendation that SchoolEngage will offer is investigate. This means that there's a lot going on in this section and it's not necessarily clear what's going on. Maybe there's a lot of minor changes, or maybe there is a key change, but it's maybe only one digit, like a phone number changed by one digit, and it's not totally clear if it's a new phone number or a correction, then we'll recommend investigation. The last option is cancel. If SchoolEngage looks through your data and it seems like there is a ton of problems, like you're overwriting a whole bunch of data in PowerSchool and it's just going to be a mess generally, then sometimes we'll actually suggest that you cancel out of the write-back process and you need to review that form more. If SchoolEngage doesn't think that the form was adequately reviewed and it's going to cause data problems almost guaranteed, those are the situations that you'll be recommended a cancel. So all of this has to do with what actions we're taking and what actions were recommended. So it's finally time to go through actions. In SchoolEngage, there will be either 2 or 3 actions on each section. It does depend on the section itself because in PowerSchool there are also restrictions. Generally speaking, there is add, edit, and delete in PowerSchool. The 3 big exceptions to this are gender, primary language, and identification information. These sections actually do not allow adds in PowerSchool either because they generally don't change in the same way. Like people very commonly, even as frequently as once a year, might move their house, and so you want to add a new record. But the primary language you speak at home, it changes, but it's not like a new thing. You would just edit the records that there. And so SchoolEngage has followed this with add, edit, or ignore. We have chosen as a general rule that we are not going to allow admin assistants to delete records through SchoolEngage's interface, just because there are actually very few valid cases in which you'd want to delete a record. Generally speaking, it would have to be a very significant genuine error for you to need to delete a record. And so if that was the case, we would ask that you just go to PowerSchool and look into it further because it's beyond the scope of what you should be doing in the writeback of SchoolEngage, because that's ultimately about moving data from SchoolEngage to PowerSchool, not removing data that's in PowerSchool. So at the bottom of that pop-up that I showed you guys, there is the drop-down, and this contains the action for that specific section. So just to be very clear, for every section of that state reporting page, you will be prompted to choose an action. They don't have to be the same because sometimes you'll have a mix of adds, edits, and ignores all within one record. So the first action that I'm going to dive into a bit deeper is that add action. And again, this is the same as the plus sign in PowerSchool. So this will update the fields in the state reporting page. So you will see it right away on that state reporting page. But when it's passed on to PASI through the PASI queue in PowerSchool, it's going to expire the previous record with the date of the new effective date and add it as a brand new entry in PASI. So when you go and click that PASI profile button at the top of the Alberta reporting page, or you're directly in PASI prep, it will now show as 2 records, even though in PowerSchool it seems to only be 1. This should be used for, as I mentioned before, a brand new point of information for a student. So a data correction and typos and that you'd never want to add. But if it's a genuine move, a genuine new phone, a genuine new address, that's all stuff that you want to document. And that's when you would want to use an add. In the table that we had before, if you are adding a new record, it is going to highlight the new values in green, as it will be pulling only the data from SchoolEngage and dropping that into PowerSchool as a brand new entry. The second action that you will have access to, and this one will be available for all records, is the edit action, which again is the pencil icon in PowerSchool. This will take whatever record is already in PowerSchool, and it will only add in the new changes. And when it gets passed on to PASI, it'll tell PASI, okay, this is it's just a correction. There was a typo in this data, and we need you to fix it up. But it's not a move. The student didn't move. It's the same house, but previously they got the address wrong, whether it was just not capitalized in that nice Canada Post format, or it was not correct. Maybe the last digit was a 7 when it should have been a 6. In this case, the values that will not be changed at all in PowerSchool will show in the current PowerSchool column as green, and the new data that is being diffed in from SchoolEngage will show in green. So in this case, it's only going to be touching the postal code and the mailing effective date. And as I mentioned earlier, when they add the auditing in for PowerSchool 20.4, then you'll get to see that just those two fields were changed at any given time. As I've said a few times now, you should edit only for corrections to data that was genuinely, I don't want to say it was completely wrong, but there was an aspect of it that was wrong. If it was completely wrong, you might want to consider ignoring or deleting it. And then that third action that I've mentioned a few times now is the ignore action. So this is when you just don't think that the data in SchoolEngage is correct. Maybe they changed the capitalization. Maybe it's completely out in left field, like they put the wrong province or country in for some reason, and you don't want that data going into your PowerSchool. Then you can click ignore. It will highlight the current PowerSchool column in green to signify that it's keeping everything in PowerSchool and it's dropping whatever was on the SchoolEngage form. And those are the three main actions that you will need to do. So as I've mentioned, this is going to be step by step. If there's 4 sections requiring action on the Alberta State page, you'll be prompted with 4 windows during writeback. There's just a next button that you click through them once you click a given action. And as I mentioned, they don't all have to be the same action, but you do have to acknowledge all PASI actions before it will let you continue, just because otherwise it's just going to throw a core alert and there's no reason continuing. So one of the other actions that I mentioned in the recommendations is cancel. This is always available at the bottom of the PASI page. I have a question from Megan. Would you recommend the admin assistants to go back to review the section and fix the data instead of choosing ignore? That's a good question, and I think it depends on how bad the data is. Because if for example, the address just has a capitalization issue, I don't know if I'd recommend going back and correcting it. I mean, that's something that the admin assistant probably should have caught during review, but it's not the end of the world because it's still the correct data. But you could. There's nothing preventing you from doing so. It's just maybe not necessary. But if the piece of data, as I said, had changed in PowerSchool or was outright incorrect on the form, that's where, just for auditing purposes, it might be a good idea to cancel out and go back and to correct it on the form, just because if you're wondering where that data came from, it might not be clear because the admin assistant might open up the form and say, okay, well, did this data go to PowerSchool from SchoolEngage? And then the data hasn't been corrected on the form. So if the data is outright wrong, I'd recommend changing it on the form, just in case that form gets written back in the future. I know that in PowerSchool 20.4, you can audit field history on some of the demographics fields, at least, not the Alberta State page, unfortunately, yet. But I think that's the big reason I might advocate going back and making corrections, is if there's any possibility that they may have to write back this form again, it isn't clear that the previous person maybe ignored that data for being bad. I hope that answered your question, Megan. I'd say it's up to judgment, but I think that unless it's a very, very minor just capitalization thing, you probably do want to back out and correct it because it should be caught during that review process. But as I'll show you later in this presentation, we do have some of this feedback available in the actual form review tab now, before you actually go and even start writing back or even approve the form. So a couple tips just as we leave this section. As I mentioned before, if every field in a section has changed, this almost always indicates that it should be added, just because, I mean, it's clearly a new record. As I mentioned a bit earlier, always go in and check those key fields in each section for changes, because even if there's only one, like normally if there's only one field changed, you might think it's just an edit. But if a key field was changed very significantly, you're going to want to keep an eye on that. So in the other name section, that's going to be, well, both names, maybe not the middle name, but the first and last name for sure. On the phone number, it's going to be, again, the phone number. On the mailing address, it will be the actual address itself. The identification information section can't actually be added, so it's not as relevant. But in the citizenship section, if the actual citizenship type changes, that is always an add. So again, always make sure you're reviewing those key fields and thinking about, okay, do I need to change this? And as I mentioned, we're trying to give that good recommendations through SchoolEngage, but we can't always, guarantee it's going to be 100% correct. So the second new page that we have implemented is the changes in PowerSchool page. So I mentioned a few times going through the Alberta State page that we're detecting any changes that have occurred in PowerSchool since the SchoolEngage form was generated. And that's really powerful feedback. So we decided, why stop there? So we added one additional page in the writeback process, and this page is also now available when reviewing a form called Show Changes. This will list every single field on the form that was changed, regardless of where it's from. It could be extended enrollment. It could be a custom extension that your district has. It could be demographics. It doesn't matter where it is. We will now allow you to view any piece of data that will be overwritten in PowerSchool due to a change outside of SchoolEngage as a system. I would recommend that every admin assistant starts using this functionality. Anyone who was in Jeremy's presentation yesterday, he actually did do an overview of how this Show Changes page works in SchoolEngage. That presentation is going to be available as a video as well if anyone wants to go and reference that, if they want to see more about what I'm talking about. But if there's any that they miss, we're going to prompt them again at the end of the writeback process. And if they see something on here that they're like, oh man, I don't want to overwrite this, this is an opportunity for you to cancel out of the writeback and make the correction on the form. Please review these very carefully, just especially stuff like medical fields and the grant programs, extended enrollment. These are so key for reporting and so key for the student's wellness. You do not want to wipe those out ever. So if you ever see one of those in this list, I would personally recommend backing out, because it's just too big a risk to overwrite that data and then potentially forget correcting it. If you guys are not familiar with these Show All and Show Changes features, they're not currently live for every district, just because previously we'd actually been going through the training I'm giving you all today on kind of a one-on-one basis. If this functionality is something that, if you guys have SchoolEngage and you want this, please get in contact with your kind of district lead for SchoolEngage and get them to contact us, and then we can get that set up for you and give them a bit more documentation about some of the features. Because we also have this Show All page that's super useful too and has some other features and feedback in there. So as I mentioned, if you don't have the Show All functionality and the Show Changes functionality and you want that, please ask your district SchoolEngage lead to get in contact with us, and we'll enable that for you guys. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is data validation. So I'm sure you guys have all experienced this if you're making changes in PowerSchool, and I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, but when you're making a change in PowerSchool, if you're very obviously made a mistake, such as you're missing data, the formatting is invalid, previously SchoolEngage wasn't really checking that all that closely, which led to people getting core alerts from Writeback. And I know that can be really frustrating because that's another step you have to go and clean up. So what we did is we actually went into every single piece of validation that is available on the interface in PowerSchool, and we implemented all of them. So if you try and write back a record and it violates one of those rules, it actually doesn't even attempt to send the data back. It will show you the errors here. And I know that one really common piece of feedback that we got is that the error page on writeback was very daunting. It was, sometimes raw code that was maybe intimidating for people who aren't familiar with programming. So as part of this change, we went through and tried to make as many of the errors as user readable as possible. So for most of these PASI errors, they are just in the exact same message that's there or in plain English so that you can just read the error message, see exactly what's going on, and correct it. For any of the SchoolEngage district leads or people who are involved in form generation that are here, we actually display these errors in the form editor now too. I know Jeremy talked about that again. If you want to go back and watch his presentation, we'll be sharing that shortly. But for example, if you mapped all the mailing address fields, but nowhere on the form is that mailing effective date, well, PASI is going to reject it and PowerSchool is going to reject it. So SchoolEngage will tell you right in the form editor that you need to go and add that field or you're going to run into core alerts. And that's basically the PASI writeback changes. So we've tried to make it as streamlined as possible, get the data to you guys as clearly as possible. But when you hit that writeback button, it's just going to be a few extra pages that ask you to review the data and make a decision. I'm going to move now into the document integration for what we're looking at in the future. This is going to be a pretty quick section, and then I'm going to open the floor to any questions in the chat window if anyone has them. So, as I'm sure everyone who is working in Alberta knows, PASI has started implementing their digital student record, and they are requiring that all districts start utilizing that as fully as possible. So one request that we get over and over and over again for SchoolEngage is, can we move documents from SchoolEngage to PASI? Because SchoolEngage does collect all of the document information like citizenship. We do collect stuff like custody documents if there's a sensitive family situation. Some districts are collecting proof of address for people who move. And then we actually automatically, when a form is approved, generate a PDF copy of that form and attach it into the files right away. So SchoolEngage has a ton of valuable documents, and it's kind of a pain to have to go into SchoolEngage and one by one download them and re-upload them. We've helped a couple people move them automated, but it's not a long-term solution. So what we've done as a company is that we've decided that we are going to be including a long-term solution for moving documents directly from SchoolEngage to PASI. So basically, as you saw on the previous page, we'll be adding a PASI upload button in the form review. So once this goes live as part of the form review process, you will be able to just go in and manage these documents. Although in addition to this, we will be adding a hub to do the documents in a wider sense. Anyone who is currently using SchoolEngage, you guys are, I'm sure, super familiar with the review page where you manage forms. We're going to be having something similar for PASI documents where you can filter by ones that haven't been processed or uploaded yet. So when I click on that PASI upload button, I get a page like this with two panels. The top panel is going to show me any of those documents that are currently in PASI, so I can go in, see what the metadata is, review them, and generally make sure they're all still correct and up to date. See if they need to be replaced by something else. I am just going to emphasize that these are development screenshots. These might change prior to release, but we wanted to show you just so you got a pretty good idea of what you'll be able to do. So I've got this PDF of the actual form that I filled out, the 2021 K-12 registration form, and I actually want to move that to PASI. So I'm going to go in and just expand. These are collapsible panels, so I can manage it. So when I go and expand that document, you can see all the metadata that PASI collects, and you can see a preview. Don't mind my test data. I just pulled in one of our clients' forms, so there's no actual real student data on here, but it's got the header from their form. And I can fill out any of this metadata that's missing, and I can take a look at the actual document. For admin assistance, I know that it's super important when you guys are doing forms that you're validating the citizenship document, especially that's there. And for those demographics forms, I know that sometimes they slip through the cracks and you have people who have been at your district, sometimes even like 3 or 4 years, and you somehow have not gotten their documentation information, or maybe they genuinely have new information. Maybe they were on a visa before, now they applied for citizenship and got it. You will be able to see the preview of all these files without having to download them. I know that was a huge inconvenience for you guys, so we've gone and tried to make it just that much easier. So I've got this file and I want to move it to PASI, so I'm going to go in and start filling out the metadata. I know a lot of you guys like including the ASN in the title, so I've just done that in this example and filled out the metadata. And yeah, I can save this in SchoolEngage, and whenever I think it's ready to go to PASI, then I can go ahead and hit that push to PASI button. And then SchoolEngage is going to just take care of the rest. It'll move to PASI, and then whenever it's synced to PASI, the next time that you come into this page, this document will be up on that PASI Documents tab. So you can review it again. Maybe next year they have a new citizenship document and you have to replace it. You can compare what's there, because on the other hand, sometimes parents will re-upload the same document every year, and you really don't need to be updating that in PASI. It's the same document. Now, on the flip side of this, sometimes you do get documents that you don't need in PASI. Maybe it's outdated, maybe it was redundant, maybe they uploaded the wrong thing. We've had people upload like paper forms where they've hand-drawn things before, or even like pictures that they didn't mean to upload. So if you have a file that it doesn't need to be in PASI, rather than pushing it and processing it, what you can actually do is just press the lock button. And what this does is it says, this file's in its final state. We never need to touch it again. It's just going to exist within this form, so we'll leave it be. Of course, if you accidentally lock something, you can very easily unlock it by just pressing the unlock button again. But that option's always there. So again, we're trying to streamline this as much as possible, and you'll be able to access this view through both a particular application as well as a hub review page that will be coming in the future. I don't have any development screenshots I can show you guys about it, but just trust me, it's going to be cool. And that's my presentation for you guys today. I hope I answered all your questions about, what's coming and how our new features that we're rolling out right away work. I know that for a bunch of districts, there was a lot of pain points this year because previously SchoolEngage was only editing records. And so in times that it should have been adding, it was kind of inconvenient. So Fort Mac Public Schools has asked me, what's the timing of this new PASI upload button? So we're hoping to have the development component done probably within about 1 month. And then from there, we do need to do the validation process with PASI. PASI makes us go through, checks and balances to make sure that we pass their standards. We're not going to mess with their data. And then we hope that once that is done, that we'll maybe pilot it with a district or two. But by all means, barring some very significant delay, the PASI document functionality will be available for the start of the 2021 school year. Did that answer your question? Perfect. I know I covered a lot of information. Does anyone else have any other questions? Of course, we'll be providing this documentation and this video after the fact if anyone wants to go back to it. I'll wait maybe 2 to 3 minutes to see if any other questions come in, but otherwise that will be the presentation. So we got Maria St. Pierre. Sometimes parents have more than one SchoolEngage account. Then when they try and fill out a new form, they can't find the form. How do you help them with that? It kind of depends on why they can't see the form. We do try and set up forms to have some additional conditions where like a new student's not going to see a demographics form and an existing student's not going to see a new registration form. If they have more than one SchoolEngage account, I mean, generally that's a problem as it is because we try and encourage them to always go through the parent portal account. If you have a situation like this that needs cleaning up, please contact our help desk and we can help you through it. One of our other features, and I don't have anything I can show off right now, but it is in development, hopefully coming out before the end of this year, is we are going to be rolling out a suite of tools for the district leads in each SchoolEngage district to clean up and manage all of these on their own. So if a parent does have duplicates, they will be able to merge them on their own. They'll be able to manage the forms. They'll be able to help them more easily get the forms that they need. Parents with more than one account is tricky. So as I said, right now, it's kind of it depends on why they have more than one account and what they're seeing. But we do have more features on the way. Hopefully that kind of addresses your question. I know that a lot of that's, oh, well, we have stuff coming, but it is kind of a one-on-one situation just because they should generally be going through the parent portal account if they have one, no matter what. And if they forgot their password, I know that they're really tempted to log in through SchoolEngage. But we're rolling out various features to prevent them from doing that. Like if they already have their email registered, it'll decline their registration and say if they have an account, it'll reset the password automatically for them. Okay, so you're asking about if they're transferring to a new school. Actually, very recently, about 1 month ago, we updated the form permissions that are available in SchoolEngage. If you send me a help desk ticket, Maria, I can help you through this, but we do have an option now where you can make a registration form available to students who are new to the district as well as students marked as transferred out in PowerSchool. So that's actually something I can help you with later today. It's functionality we rolled out recently. Brian has asked, are the other features the new writeback process currently available or coming very soon? So these are currently available. We've rolled them out with a handful of districts. They do involve us doing some one-on-one training as well as updating the plugins in PowerSchool. So it's something that we would roll out one at a time rather than with everyone. But if you're interested, shoot us a message and we will go and add you into the queue of who's getting set up next. So they are available right now by request. Hopefully that answers your question, Brian. We have a question from Margaret. Is this presentation will be available to us to refer to if need? Yeah, so all the webinars we're doing, I know we're doing 3 SchoolEngage webinars this week, and I know we've got some dossier ones coming up, I think. We're currently in the progress of figuring out how we're going to share these. It might be via like SharePoint or via YouTube, but we are going to have these available to people who attended the presentations. So yes, these will be available to refer to if you need to. We do also have the PDF documentation and the PowerPoint, and we'll look into getting those available to you guys as well. Yeah, I see someone else saying that they'd love a copy of the PowerPoint, so I'll make sure to get that to you guys. All right, I'm going to open up last call if there's any additional questions. Otherwise, I'll close the meeting in about a minute. We had someone to say, will they email to us when they are ready? Um, I'll let you guys know. We have to figure out how we're going to be distributing this because we want it to be as easy as possible. And that's kind of, I'll let you know. It probably will be via email or it will be a general link available somewhere for you guys to go and access. So we'll make sure that at least the leads in every district know where it's going to be so that they can relay that information onto you guys. Thank you all for attending this webinar. It was really great. I know we're trying something new with doing webinars, and I think we're likely to continue doing some occasionally over time as well whenever we have new features rolling out. So I really appreciate that all you guys came out and supported our first set of webinars here. And I hope to see some of you guys again in our webinar tomorrow on unlimited contacts. So for the user who said they didn't realize there was a webinar yesterday, we had a webinar presentation on just general new SchoolEngage features, smaller ones than the PASI and unlimited contacts, but ones that are nonetheless very useful. Whenever we make these presentations available, you'll be able to access that one as well, so don't worry.